The thing about dreams is that they're always worse in retrospect. That's what Sarah Chen thought as she scrubbed the fifth set of muddy footprints off her kitchen tile, footprints that hadn't come from her house, hadn't been invited, and certainly hadn't paid the mortgage. It started small. Spring had arrived in Meadowbrook Estates like a key turning in a lock, and suddenly everyone wanted to be outside. Sarah understood that. She'd bought her house specifically for this, the pristine backyard, the Olympic-sized pool she'd saved 12 years to install, the resort-quality lounge chairs she'd splurged on during a weak moment at Restoration Hardware. At 42, unmarried, childless, and brutally successful as a corporate litigation lawyer, this pool was her sanctuary. Her one indulgence, her proof that all those 80-hour weeks meant something tangible. The first intrusion was subtle, a Tuesday in late April around 6 p.m. Sarah arrived home from a deposition, her blazer still buttoned, her mind still 3 moves ahead on a discovery motion. She parked her Tesla in the driveway and noticed something off. The gate to her backyard fence was unlatched, just slightly, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. She walked through the kitchen, loosening her tie, and froze. 2 teenagers were in her pool. Not breaking in, not even trying to hide. They were just there. A boy and a girl, maybe 17, 18, splashing around in her chlorinated water like they owned it, like they'd been invited to a party and forgotten the part where they actually needed an invitation. Sarah's hand went to the glass door frame. Her jaw clenched so hard she thought her fillings might crack. "Hey," she called out loud enough to carry across the deck. "That's my pool." The girl looked up, water streaming down her face, and didn't even look embarrassed. "Oh, cool, it's so nice. We were just out now." Sarah opened the sliding door, and something in her voice, maybe the lawyer tone, maybe the vein that was probably now visible in her forehead, made them move. They scrambled out, grabbed their towels, her towels, she realized with growing horror, her Egyptian cotton towels, and hurried toward the gate. One of them called back, "Thanks for letting us use it," as if she'd actually said yes, as if this had been a transaction that required politeness. She locked the gate after them, tested it twice, made sure the lock was engaged. The next incident came 3 days later. Friday, the universal signal that everyone's about to lose their minds. Sarah had worked from home that day, a rare concession to the jury preparation that made her office unbearable. She was in her home office, video call with 3 other attorneys, when she heard it, the distinctive splash and shriek of children. Children, plural. She excused herself, promised to call back, and walked to the back sliding door. There were 4 of them this time. A boy maybe 10 years old, 2 younger girls, and a woman Sarah didn't recognize standing on the deck wearing a sundress, drinking what appeared to be a margarita from a plastic cup. "Excuse me," Sarah said, opening the door. Her voice was controlled, professional, edged with ice. "Can I help you?" The woman, blonde, aggressively tan, wearing sunglasses despite the afternoon hour, turned with the expression of someone who'd been caught stealing and didn't understand why it was a problem. "Oh my God, this is such a cute pool," the woman said, as if Sarah hadn't spoken. "Do you live here? We're renting the Mitchell's place next door. We were just looking for somewhere cool to cool off. Is it okay if we stay? The kids have been in the house all morning." "No," Sarah said. "It's not okay. This is a private pool on private property. You need to leave." The woman's expression shifted. She went from cheerful to something harder, something that suggested she didn't like being told no. She set her drink on the pool deck. Sarah watched it settle on her travertine stone, condensation already bleeding into the surface, and started calling the kids out of the water. "Come on, guys. Apparently we're not welcome here." She said it in that particular way that told her children Sarah was the villain, that Sarah was being unreasonable, that there was something fundamentally wrong with a person who wouldn't share their pool. The children dragged themselves out, dripping, and Sarah caught the woman muttering to someone on her phone as they left. "Can you believe that? How rude can you get?" That night, Sarah changed her pool access. She'd had a gate for years, but she'd never felt the need to lock it. Now she added a keypad, a respectable one with a 4-digit code painted to match the fence. She told no one the combination. She lay in bed and imagined all the times in the next few weeks when people would arrive at her gate and find themselves on the wrong side of it. The thought should have comforted her. It didn't. Because what Sarah didn't account for was that Meadowbrook Estates ran on a particular currency. Entitlement and the confidence that came with living in a place where everyone looked like everyone else, made the same amount of money, and fundamentally believed that the rules were suggestions for people without the right zip code. The gate didn't stop them. They came over the fence. It started happening midweek. Sarah would come home and find evidence of intrusion. Poolside chairs moved, her white patio umbrella tilted at an angle she didn't remember, a soggy paper plate left behind with the remains of someone else's lunch. She started installing security cameras, expensive ones. She reviewed the footage like she was building a legal case because in her mind she was. Monday at 2 p.m., 3 adults, 2 children, a golden retriever, actual dog footprints on her deck, stayed for 40 minutes. One of the men had floated on a raft that wasn't hers, drinking beer, while the dog shook itself repeatedly, decorating everything within 6 feet with a fine mist of chlorinated water. Wednesday at 4:30 p.m., a group of 5 teenagers boom-box pizza boxes. They jumped the fence in broad daylight, apparently unaware that her house was occupied. One of them had actually turned to the others and said, "Bro, this place is empty, nobody's gonna know." They were wrong. Sarah knew. She was watching from inside, fists clenched, phone in hand, debating whether to call the police or walk out there and commit a crime that would land her in prison. She called the police. They showed up 40 minutes later, by which time the teenagers had already left, and the officers seemed to suggest that this was just a teenage thing, just kids being kids, and had she considered that maybe she was being a little unfriendly by not sharing. One of them, Officer Martinez, according to his name tag, actually said, if they wanted to steal something, they could break into your house. At least they're just swimming. Sarah had stared at him until he looked away. Friday night was worse. She'd been working late again, sitting at her dining room table with case files spread across the surface, red pen in hand, when she heard music. Not from inside, from outside. Loud music. Current pop music, the kind that played at bars and clubs, the kind you felt in your chest. She walked to the back window, and her vision went white. It was a full-blown party. There had to be 30 people in her backyard. 30. They'd strung lights across her deck somehow, had brought in a portable speaker the size of a small refrigerator, had set up a cooler, her cooler. She'd recognized that blew anywhere with drinks. Someone had gotten into her garage and taken her high-end lounge chairs, the ones she'd specifically ordered from Italy, and arranged them around the pool like they were hosting. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped her phone. She dialed 911 with a finger that didn't feel like her own. 911, what's your emergency? There's a trespassing situation at my home. There are approximately 30 people in my backyard without permission. They've taken my property. I need police immediately. The operator's voice changed, moved into protocol. Sarah gave her address, described the situation. She was told a unit would be dispatched. Sarah didn't wait for them. She walked out the back door, her silk pajamas suddenly feeling like armor, and walked straight toward the crowd. She didn't have a plan. She had rage and legal ownership and a liver that had apparently decided to release all its protective chemicals directly into her bloodstream. "This is my property," she announced, her voice cutting through the music like a knife. "Everyone out now." Someone laughed, actually laughed. A man in a polo shirt holding a beer looked at her and smirked like she was performing for him. "Come on, lady, it's just a pool party, relax." "Relax? I'm calling the police," Sarah said quietly. That changed things. The crowd started to disperse, people suddenly remembering they had other places to be, suddenly concerned about why a woman in pajamas looked like she might actually combust into flames. Within 5 minutes, most of them had scattered over the fence or through her house and out the front door. The police arrived 10 minutes after that, found her standing alone on her pool deck, and took a report that would go nowhere. No property damage, no assault, just kids having fun, just a neighborhood issue that should be worked out between neighbors. "Have you tried talking to them?" Officer Martinez suggested. He was back, apparently having nothing better to do on a Friday night than watch rich people have problems. Sometimes a simple conversation can. "I have tried talking to them," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet now, which somehow made it worse. "I've tried locking the gate. I've tried calling the police. What I haven't tried is being okay with this. That's not going to happen." After the police left, she stood in her backyard in the dark. The string lights were gone. The cooler was gone. The only evidence of the party was the small damage scattered around, a broken glass near the deep end, someone's forgotten flip-flop, the lingering smell of spilled beer and sunscreen. Sarah made a decision. If Meadowbrook Estates wanted a public pool, then she would give them a public pool, but not in any way they'd enjoy. The renovation company Sarah called was named Henderson and Associates, and they specialized in landscape destruction. Or that's how Sarah thought of it. The actual owner, a man named Dale who'd apparently seen it all in his 30 years of business, just nodded along as Sarah explained what she wanted. "You want to demolish a perfectly good pool," Dale said. He had a pencil behind his ear and dirt under his fingernails. He was standing in Sarah's backyard on a Saturday morning, looking at her in-ground pool like it was a piece of evidence in a crime scene. "I want to destroy it beyond recognition," Sarah corrected, "and I want to do it in the most visible way possible." Dale didn't ask questions. In his experience, people who wanted their pools demolished had reasons. He'd seen divorces, expensive affairs, and drug dealers' houses. He'd learned not to judge. "You sure about this? This is a $30,000 asset, easy." "Very sure." The plan came together over coffee in Sarah's kitchen. Dale sketched it out on a napkin, and Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in days. It was a smile that probably would have scared people who knew her well. The pool would be excavated, complete excavation, removing the shell, the concrete base, all of it. Then the hole would be filled with a specially prepared substrate, a clay-heavy mixture that, when wet, would transform into legitimate mud. Not just any mud, either. Dale knew a company that supplied specialty mud for mud runs and obstacle courses. Genuine, professional-grade mud that maintained its consistency and could be kept damp with a simple underground watering system. "So it's going to be actual quicksand, basically?" Dale asked. "Close enough," Sarah said. "And it needs to be obvious. I want the whole neighborhood to see what this used to be. I want them to think about it every time they look at my backyard." "You want them to know it's on purpose," Dale translated. "Exactly." The work started the following Monday at 7 a.m. Sarah took a personal day, not because she needed to supervise. Dale and his team knew what they were doing, but because she wanted to watch it happen. She wanted to see her beautiful pool, the achievement of 12 years of savings and work, get ripped apart by a backhoe, watched by the entire neighborhood. And they were watching. Sarah could feel it. By 9 a.m., she'd noticed at least 3 people from neighboring houses stopping to stare. By noon, when the backhoe had breached the deep end and water was spilling across the yard like a rupture, people had actually stopped walking to gawk. "Is she destroying her pool?" she heard someone say. A woman from 2 houses down, standing with her husband, genuine confusion in her voice. Sarah waved at them from her deck. The woman jerked back, startled, like she'd been caught doing something illegal. By 3 p.m., the pool was gone. What remained was a massive crater, and looking at it was like looking at a missing tooth. The absence was more striking than the original presence. The mud application took another 3 days. Henderson and Associates brought in truck after truck of the specialty substrate. A team of 5 men spread it, graded it, installed the underground watering system that would keep it in perpetual dampness. By Thursday afternoon, it was done. Sarah stood at the edge of her property and looked at what used to be a luxury resort in her own backyard. Now it was a legitimate mud pit, an honest-to-God, purpose-built mud pit, approximately 30 feet in diameter, varying in depth from 3 feet to 8 feet. It looked like a battlefield. It looked like the earth had opened up and swallowed something precious, which she supposed was exactly the point. The neighborhood had watched the entire process. Sarah was certain of it. She'd noticed the doubled glances, the phone calls people made when they passed the construction fence, the discussions that probably happened in dining rooms across Meadowbrook Estates. And she'd prepared for the blowback. It came on Friday morning, when Dale was doing final touches, when Sarah was reviewing the specifications on her laptop, and her doorbell rang. She knew who it would be before she opened the door. A delegation, how very suburban. Standing on her porch were 5 people. Brad Harrison from 3 doors down, neighborhood watch captain, always had been insufferable. Jennifer Mitchell, the woman from the rental, the margarita drinker. David Cho from next door, who'd never said a word to Sarah in the 5 years she'd owned the house, but apparently had opinions now. And 2 people Sarah didn't recognize, probably members of the Homeowners Association. Brad was holding a folder, official-looking. Sarah could smell the bureaucracy from inside her house. "Sarah," he said, not quite managing to keep the concern from his voice. It was the same tone used to discuss mold in the basement or a rusty mailbox. "Can we talk about the pool situation?" Sarah opened the door wider. She wasn't going to let them dictate this conversation from her threshold. "Come in," she said. They filed into her living room like they were walking into a funeral home. One of the people she didn't recognize, a woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, actually took a seat without being invited, pulling out documents. "I'm Victoria Reeves, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA," she announced, "and we're here about a violation of community standards." "I'm listening," Sarah said. She remained standing, forcing them all to look up at her. It was a cheap power move, but it was something. "The pool," Victoria continued, adjusting her glasses, "was one of the key features of your property. Removing it has aesthetically altered the neighborhood character. Additionally, I'm concerned about liability issues with an open pit in a residential area." "It's not an open pit," Sarah said calmly. "It's a decorative feature, mulch pit essentially." "It's a mud pit," Brad said. He said it like she was denying reality. "Everyone in the neighborhood has seen you destroying a perfectly good pool." "What everyone in the neighborhood has done," Sarah corrected, "is use my private property without permission, repeatedly, against my explicit requests to stop. I documented 37 separate trespassing incidents over 8 weeks. I have video evidence, timestamps, and photographs." She paused, letting that settle. "I called the police 7 times. 7. Each time I was told there was nothing they could do, that this was a neighborhood issue. So I solved the neighborhood issue. I made my pool unusable. That solved the problem." "You can't just destroy your property to make a point," David Cho said. He was looking at her like she was insane, which maybe she was, but she didn't particularly care what he thought. "Actually, I can," Sarah said. "It's my property, my investment, my decision. There's no HOA regulation against having a mud pit, is there?" She looked directly at Victoria. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "There's no specific regulation against mud pits, but—" "Then we don't have a problem," Sarah interrupted. "And I'd advise everyone here to understand something. I'm not interested in negotiating. I'm not interested in compromise. I'm interested in having a yard that's mine again. That's not negotiable." Jennifer Mitchell, who'd been quiet until now, suddenly stood up. She was angry, Sarah realized, properly angry. "You know what you did? You made the entire neighborhood angry. Kids were excited to have a pool nearby, a community space, and you destroyed it out of spite." "A community space," Sarah repeated slowly, "that I owned and was forced to share without consent. That's not community, that's theft, that's entitlement, and that's exactly what I'm done with." After they left, Brad still protesting, Victoria muttering about review boards and legal precedent, David looking like he'd witnessed something primal, Sarah locked her door and sat in the quiet of her living room. She felt lighter, emptier maybe, but lighter. By Saturday, the mud pit was complete. Dale had done a beautiful job. The mud looked professional, maintained, not like a disaster, but like a choice. The grass surrounding it was still pristine. There were even decorative landscaping rocks around the perimeter, placed there by Henderson and Associates as a kind of finishing touch. Sarah hired a professional photographer to take images of the finished project. She wanted to document it. She wanted the image to exist in the world, evidence that this had happened, that she had made this choice. Then she made another choice. She created a social media account, a simple one just for this. She posted the photographs with a caption, "Problem solved. I recommend this solution to anyone tired of sharing their private property. Be my guest. Try getting near it now." The post blew up within hours. By evening, it had been shared in 3 different neighborhood Facebook groups. By the next morning, it was being discussed in the Meadowbrook Estates community chat, the one Sarah had never bothered to join. By Monday, local news had caught wind of it. A reporter called her office. "We're interested in your pool story," the reporter said. His name was Michael Chen, and he sounded both amused and curious in equal measure. "Is it true you had a pool you destroyed?" "Is it true that people in my neighborhood repeatedly trespassed on my property despite being asked to stop?" Sarah countered. "Yes, and yes, I've addressed the situation." The interview happened on her front lawn on Tuesday morning. Sarah wore a blazer and slacks, ready for combat if necessary, and explained the situation with the calm precision of someone who'd spent 15 years winning arguments for a living. "They treated it like a public park," she told the camera. "And when the normal channels, the police, legal boundaries, personal requests, failed, I did what I could to reclaim my property. I removed the temptation. Now it's just mine." The reporter asked if she felt bad about it. "Should I?" Sarah asked. I bought this house, I paid for the pool, I asked people to stop trespassing, I called the police. I did everything right, the system failed, I adapted. The segment aired that night on the local 6 o'clock news. By Wednesday, it had been picked up by regional stations. By Thursday, it was trending on social media platforms. People were calling her a hero. People were calling her a villain. People were psychoanalyzing her in Reddit threads at 3 a.m. The first real consequence of her viral mud pit came in the form of a lawsuit threat, which arrived via certified mail on a Wednesday morning. Brad Harrison, acting as a representative of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, was suing for diminution of neighborhood character and environmental hazard creation. The lawsuit claimed the mud pit was a public nuisance. Sarah read it over breakfast, felt a flutter of something that might have been fear, and then called her legal team. "This isn't going anywhere," her associate Monica told her after reviewing the document. Monica had worked with Sarah for 8 years and knew her well enough to understand that Sarah didn't want reassurance, she wanted facts. "There's no legal precedent for preventing someone from using their own property in this way, and you're not violating any zoning laws or building codes. The mud pit is stable, it's not toxic, it's contained. They're just upset." "Sue them for harassment," Sarah said, "and for the legal fees they're forcing me to incur." "Sarah, they're trying to intimidate me. That's exactly what this is. We countersue, we make it expensive. We make them understand that using the legal system as a weapon has consequences." Monica nodded slowly. Sarah could tell she didn't entirely approve, but Monica also knew that arguing with Sarah about strategic decisions was like arguing with the tide. Better to just ride the wave and keep your footing. The countersuit was filed within 48 hours. But the lawsuit, it turned out, was just the visible part of the conflict. The real impact was happening in subtler ways. Sarah first noticed it at the grocery store. She was buying her usual items: organic vegetables, free-range chicken, the expensive cheese she allowed herself as a weekly indulgence, when she saw Jennifer Mitchell 3 aisles over. The woman saw her, and Sarah watched her physically stiffen. Jennifer turned and walked the opposite direction. Then it was at the gym. Sarah's spin class was suddenly full of pregnant pauses and people who stopped mid-conversation when she arrived. She would go to take her normal bike, and suddenly the community there felt different. Colder. She made it through 3 classes before she decided it wasn't worth it. Then there was the incident at the coffee shop. Sarah had gone to her usual place, the Daily Brew, at 6:47 a.m., same as every Tuesday and Thursday morning. She ordered her usual drink, a cortado with an extra shot, and waited at the pickup counter while the barista made it. Around her, other regulars who'd become semi-familiar faces over the years were getting their coffee too. When the cortado arrived, Sarah didn't notice anything unusual. She left, got to her car, and took the first sip before pulling out of the parking lot. She immediately realized something was wrong. The taste was off, sharp, chemical. She spat it out, pulled over, and opened the door to dump the rest. Her hands were shaking, not from fear but from rage so pure and immediate that she could barely see straight. She went back into the coffee shop. "Who made this?" she demanded, holding up the cup. The barista, a kid named Tyler who'd made her cortado exactly right for 6 months, went white. That was me." "Why? Did you do something to this?" Tyler looked terrified. Around them the coffee shop had gone quiet. "No, I made it exactly like I always do, I swear." Sarah looked at the drink. She looked at Tyler, and she realized that she couldn't actually prove he'd done anything wrong. Maybe he had, maybe he hadn't. Maybe one of the other baristas had made an intervention. Maybe one of the other customers had. Maybe she was spiraling. She put the cup down on the counter slowly. "I'm going to have this tested," she said quietly. "And if there's anything in here that isn't supposed to be in here, we're going to have a very different conversation. Do you understand me?" Tyler nodded, a jerky, frightened movement. Sarah left. She didn't have the drink tested, but she didn't go back to the Daily Brew either. Instead, she brought a coffee maker to her office and made her cortados there. That was Tuesday of week 2 of the viral mud pit era. By Friday, the pattern had accelerated. Someone vandalized her car, not badly, just a deep scratch along the driver's side door, the kind of thing that didn't rate insurance but required $3,000 to fix because it needed repainting. No witnesses, no suspects, just her car damaged. Someone left a note on her door. "We know where you live." It was printed from a computer, anonymous, absolutely useless as evidence but useful as a threat. Her trash cans were tipped over one night, the garbage spilled across her driveway. Someone egged her house, but only on one side, like they'd been in a hurry. She found a rock with a note attached to it near her porch, thrown hard enough to crack a garden decoration. The note said, "Some of us have kids who remember that pool." Each incident was small. None of them were technically serious, but cumulatively they created an atmosphere that was suffocating. Sarah realized about 2 weeks into this that she'd been making her house preparations. She'd been leaving exterior lights on. She'd been parking her car in the garage instead of the driveway. She'd been checking her locks multiple times before bed. She'd been scared. "This is escalating," Monica said during a call on a Friday afternoon. They were discussing the lawsuit, which Brad's lawyers were now actually pushing forward with, making noise about precedent and environmental regulations. "Sarah, I think you need to consider talking to someone, not a therapist," Monica added quickly, knowing Sarah, "but maybe someone who specializes in security or mediation." "I'm not mediating," Sarah said flatly. "I'm not compromising. I'm not going to sit down with Brad Harrison and talk about how we can all get along. That's exactly what he wants. He wants me to fold." "Then maybe you need to think about whether this is actually winning," Monica said quietly. Sarah hung up, not violently, just put the phone down. She was done with people trying to help her see reason. That night she ordered a professional security system. Not just cameras. She already had those, but motion sensors, door and window alarms, a monitored system connected to local police. She paid extra for the professional installation and the highest tier of monitoring. "You've got a problem?" the installer asked, a man named Rick who'd installed systems in Meadowbrook for years. "I've got a mud pit," Sarah said. Rick laughed. "Oh, you're the pool lady. Yeah, I heard. My son showed me the video." He paused, working on a sensor. "For what it's worth, my opinion, you paid for your pool, your backyard. Nothing you did was wrong." "Thank you," Sarah said, and she meant it. But that night, after Rick left, after she'd tested all the sensors and confirmed the system was armed, Sarah sat in her living room and realized something that made her uncomfortable. She was becoming what Meadowbrook Estates thought she was. She was the villain in their story, the difficult woman, the one who wouldn't share, the one who'd blown up her own life out of spite, and maybe, the thought crept in unwanted, insistent, maybe some of that was true. No, she pushed it back down. She'd been violated, repeatedly. She'd asked nicely. She'd asked legally. She'd asked through police. She'd done everything right. It wasn't her fault that the system didn't work and that other people decided to respond with hostility rather than understanding. It definitely wasn't her fault that she'd destroyed a $30,000 pool. On Saturday morning, Sarah got a visit from the police. Not Officer Martinez this time, but someone new. A detective named Sarah Osman, which was strange. Meeting another Sarah in her living room, drinking her coffee, asking her questions about the incidents. "We've received several reports of threats being made toward you," Detective Osman explained. She was careful with her words, precise. "The note about knowing where you live, the vandalism, the eggs, we're treating this seriously." "I appreciate that," Sarah said. "The thing is," Detective Osman continued, "we've also heard from multiple people in the neighborhood about the trespassing, about your security footage." She pulled out a file. "Apparently you documented quite a bit of it." "I did. I sent those to Officer Martinez when I reported the incidents." "I know, I've reviewed them. They're compelling evidence of trespassing." Osman closed the file. "But I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Did you destroy your pool intending to escalate this situation?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She thought about the backhoe. She thought about watching the water spill out. She thought about the moment she decided to post it on social media. She thought about the satisfaction she'd felt when it went viral. "I destroyed my pool to solve a problem," she said finally. "The escalation happened because people couldn't accept that I was no longer going to be convenient." "That's not actually an answer to my question," Osman said gently. "No," Sarah admitted, "it's not." Osman leaned back. "Here's what I think is happening. I think you were treated unfairly. I think the legal system failed you. I think people were violating your property and no one cared, so you fixed it in a very visible way. But I also think that fixing it in a very visible way publicly was an escalation tactic, whether you meant it to be or not. And now you've got a neighborhood that's either angry with you or sympathetic to you, and angry people do things. Sometimes those things are illegal." Sometimes they're just mean. So what do you recommend? Sarah asked. I recommend you stop baiting them, Osmond said. Stop posting on social media about it. Stop engaging with the narrative. Let this die down. Most of these incidents are coming from teenagers and people who are angry. If you don't feed it, it will fade. After Osmond left, Sarah deleted her social media post. She didn't do it because she thought the detective was right. She did it because she realized that Osmond had seen her clearly, and what she'd seen wasn't admirable. What she'd seen was a woman who'd been wronged, and then had made a choice that was less about solving the problem and more about making sure everyone knew she'd solved it. Less about reclaiming her space and more about rubbing it in everyone's face. Sarah had spent 15 years in law being right, being brilliant, being so clearly correct that juries had no choice but to side with her. But being right and being wise, those weren't the same thing. She looked out at her mud pit through the window. It was empty on this Saturday, silent. Just a hole in the ground where her pool used to be, maintained by an underground watering system, a monument to what? Her victory, her petty revenge. For the first time since destroying the pool, Sarah wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. 3 weeks after destroying the pool, Sarah Chen was offered partnership at her law firm. It was the culmination of a decade and a half of 80-hour weeks, of winning every case that mattered, of never taking a vacation. The email came on a Monday morning, and it was exactly what she'd been working toward her entire adult life. She read it 4 times and felt nothing. She was at the firm's downtown office that day, in a conference room preparing for a deposition. The senior partner, Richard Kwan, had asked her to his office after she'd finished her morning presentation. He'd closed the door. Richard never closed the door, and he'd told her that her partnership had been approved by the committee. Effective immediately. Corner office, profit sharing, all of it. You've earned this, Richard had said, and he'd meant it. Sarah could hear the genuineness in his voice. Frankly, I'm surprised it took us this long to make it official. Sarah had thanked him. She'd shaken his hand. She'd taken the folder with all the documents she'd need to sign, and she'd walked out of his office feeling like she was watching someone else's life happen. That night, she brought the partnership agreement home. She sat at her dining room table with a glass of wine and read through every page carefully. It was everything she'd ever wanted. The salary increase was substantial enough to buy another house if she wanted. She'd have staff reporting to her. She'd have the authority to take on clients, to build her own practice within the firm, to become a name people recognized beyond just Meadowbrook Estates and the online communities where she was currently infamous. And she didn't want it. Not because she'd changed so much that she didn't care about her career anymore, that wasn't true, but because she realized, sitting there with the agreement in front of her, that her career was the only thing she had. No family, no partner, no kids, just cases and wins and the hollow satisfaction of being right. She thought about the trespassing teenagers before she'd been angry about them, the neighborhood kids who'd wanted to cool off in the summer, the parents who'd wanted their children to have a place to play. She'd been so focused on the violation, on the principle of the thing, that she hadn't noticed that what she was really protecting was an asset. A thing, not a life, not a community, a thing. The mud pit was all the evidence she needed. Sarah signed the partnership agreement on Tuesday morning. Richard beamed at her. The other partners congratulated her. They took her to lunch at a restaurant she didn't particularly enjoy, ate food she didn't particularly taste, and talked about future plans she didn't particularly have. That afternoon, she received a letter from David Cho. Not an official notice or a lawsuit threat, but a handwritten letter, on actual paper, in an envelope with her address carefully written on the front. Sarah, I haven't spoken to you in the 5 years I've lived here, and that's my fault. I realized after the mud pit incident that I didn't know you at all, and I made assumptions about who you were based on the worst possible interpretation of your actions. I wrote this letter a dozen times and threw it away a dozen times because I didn't know how to apologize for something you decided was my fault. But I watched Detective Osmond come to your house. I saw that the harassment incidents that started after your pool was destroyed came from people in this neighborhood. I realized that Brad, the HOA, we made you feel unsafe. We decided that the right response to you setting a boundary was to cross more boundaries. We were wrong. I don't expect this letter to change anything. I don't expect you to forgive us or to think differently about this neighborhood. But I wanted you to know that at least one person here understands what they did to you, and at least one person is sorry. David Cho. Sarah read the letter 3 times. She kept it on her dining room table for 2 days. Then she walked it next door and slipped it back into David's mailbox, attached to a note that said, "Thank you, I'm sorry too." She didn't explain what she was sorry for. She wasn't even entirely sure. Sorry that she'd destroyed her pool, sorry that she'd made it public, sorry that she'd let them make her so angry that she'd become someone she didn't recognize. All of the above, maybe. That weekend, the weather was beautiful. Saturday morning, crystal clear, temperature climbing toward 80 degrees. Sarah stood in her backyard and looked at the mud pit. It was still there exactly as it had been. The underground watering system had kept the mud at optimal consistency. The landscaping rocks around it were perfectly arranged. To anyone who didn't know, it might look intentional. It might even look nice in a weird, avant-garde way. But Sarah knew the truth. It was a monument to a moment when she'd lost her mind. She called Dale at Henderson and Associates. "I want to reverse it," she told him. "I want the pool back." There was a pause. Sarah could almost hear Dale running through the logistics in his head. "That's going to be expensive," he said finally. "You're looking at a complete rebuild. The infrastructure is gone. We'd need to do new plumbing, new electrical, new shell. Probably 90 grand if you want it comparable to what you had before." "I understand. Can you do it?" "Yeah, but Sarah." "Can you?" "I can. I'm going to ask, though. Are you sure? Because once this is done, this is a different kind of signal than destroying it was." Sarah thought about that. He was right. Destroying the pool had been an act of anger and boundary setting. Rebuilding it would be an act of, what? Surrender, forgiveness. "I'm sure," she said. "Can you start this week?" The excavation started on Thursday. In a weird echo of the destruction process, the neighborhood watched as the backhoe arrived and started the process of reclamation. Within 2 days, the mud pit had been filled. By the end of the week, the new pool shell had been installed. The work took longer than Sarah had anticipated. There were complications with the plumbing that required a specialist. But by the following Thursday, exactly 2 weeks after she'd made the decision, the new pool was filled. It was different from the original in small ways. The shell had a slightly different color, something between gray and blue instead of the pure azure she'd originally chosen. The deck was reconfigured slightly to accommodate the new plumbing access. But it was a pool. It was exactly what used to be there. Sarah didn't tell anyone. She didn't post about it on social media. She didn't notify the neighborhood. She simply maintained it, keeping the water clear, the deck clean. It took 2 days before someone noticed. She was getting out of her car, coming home from work on a Saturday, when she heard the voice from across the fence. Did you rebuild it?" It was Jennifer Mitchell, the woman from the rental house, the margarita drinker, the person whose child had been disappointed by the mud pit. Sarah turned to look at her. The woman looked confused, uncertain. "I did," Sarah said. "But why?" Jennifer asked. "I thought you hated us using it." Sarah considered how to answer that. The truth was complicated. It involved partnership agreements and hollow victories, and the realization that being right wasn't the same thing as being okay. "I thought the pool was the problem," Sarah said finally. "Turns out it wasn't. The problem was something else entirely." Over the next few weeks, something began to shift in the neighborhood. People didn't immediately start asking to use the pool again. Sarah hadn't invited them, but they stopped leaving her hostile notes. The vandalism stopped. She'd wake up to find her trash cans upright, not tipped over. No one egged her house. David Cho waved at her one morning when she was leaving for work. Just a simple, friendly wave. The kind neighbors gave each other. The lawsuit went away quietly. Brad Harrison apparently realized that suing someone with a documented harassment pattern wasn't going to win him the moral high ground or the court case, so his lawyers sent a withdrawal notice. Monica called to tell her. "They're dropping it entirely," Monica said. "No settlement, no agreement, just withdrawal." "Good," Sarah said. "You know what's interesting about this?" Monica continued. "You could countersue and probably win. They harassed you. You have documentation. You could make this very expensive for them." Sarah thought about it, about how good it would feel to win, to be right, to have a legal victory tattooed across the neighborhood as evidence of her rightness. "No," she said, "let it be over." By the middle of summer, the neighborhood had something close to normal again. Sarah still didn't invite people to use her pool, but she also didn't stop them anymore. If she found teenagers in it, she didn't call the police. She just let them swim. She'd keep her distance, but she'd let them have the water. One afternoon in July, a girl, maybe 13 or 14, approached her while Sarah was sitting on the deck reading. The girl was wet, clearly having been in the pool. "I wanted to say thank you," the girl said awkwardly. "My mom said you could have ruined everything, but you didn't, so thank you." Sarah set her book down. "What's your name?" "Emily." "Emily, I want to ask you something. Did you and your friends ask permission before using the pool last summer?" Emily looked at her feet. "No, we knew it was private, but my friend said no one would care. I'm sorry." "It's okay," Sarah said. "I get it, you were hot, you wanted to swim, you didn't think about whose pool it was, that's human. But in the future, ask. Even if you think the answer is no, even if you think no one will care, ask. Does that make sense?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, it does." After Emily went back to the pool, Sarah sat with that interaction. It wasn't redemptive. It wasn't magical. But it was something close to real. Close to understanding what had actually been wrong, not that the pool existed or that people wanted to use it, but that the boundaries around it had been violated, and that violation had made her so angry that she'd tried to solve it by destroying the thing itself rather than by just being clear and firm about whose it was. In August, Sarah received a handwritten invitation to a neighborhood gathering, a backyard barbecue. The invitation was from a couple she didn't know, the Johnsons, who apparently lived 4 houses down and wanted to organize something for the whole community. No specific mention of the pool incident, just an invitation. Sarah's first instinct was to decline. Her second instinct was to accept. She went with the second. The barbecue happened on a Saturday at 6 in the evening. Sarah arrived with a bottle of wine that cost more than was reasonable for a neighborhood event and immediately felt overdressed in her linen pants and silk blouse. Everyone else was in casual clothes, summer dresses and shorts, but people didn't turn away from her. Mrs. Johnson hugged her, apparently deciding that they'd made peace enough. "I'm so glad you could make it," Mrs. Johnson said. "We heard about everything that happened. I wanted to create something positive for the whole community." Sarah didn't see Brad Harrison there. She did see David Cho, who nodded at her. She saw some of the parents whose kids had been trespassing, standing around a grill, talking about work and kids and the heat. She found herself standing next to Jennifer Mitchell at one point, by the drink table. "I owe you an apology," Jennifer said. She wasn't looking at Sarah, was carefully not making it confrontational. "I brought my kids to your pool without permission. I was rude when you asked me to leave. I was part of what made things difficult." "You were part of it," Sarah agreed, and Jennifer flinched slightly. "But I was also out of proportion in my response. We can both be true." "Yeah," Jennifer said, and she looked at Sarah now, and there was relief in her eyes. Relief that Sarah wasn't going to eviscerate her. Relief that this could be simple. "Yeah, I think we can be." By the end of the evening, Sarah had talked to at least a dozen neighbors. No one mentioned the mud pit directly. No one apologized excessively. But there was a kind of peaceful resolution in the air, the kind that happened when everyone agreed that the conflict had been stupid and was better over. When she got home that night, Sarah stood in her backyard and looked at her pool. It was dark, unlit, just a rectangle of water that reflected stars. It was just a pool, not a symbol anymore, not a monument to violation or victory or rage, just a pool. She thought about the partnership she'd accepted. She thought about the case files waiting in her office. She thought about the next 20 years of her life stretching out the way it had been stretching, long, successful, and empty. And she made another decision. Sarah asked for a sabbatical 3 weeks into her partnership. Richard Quan's expression went through several emotions: confusion, disappointment, frustration, before settling into resignation. "How long?" he asked. 3 months to start, maybe longer." "Sarah, you just became a partner. You have cases." "I'm going to finish the Meridian case, and I'm turning over my other active files to Monica. She's ready. She's always been ready." Richard didn't try to stop her after that. He knew Sarah well enough to understand that her mind was made up. The partnership agreement had a sabbatical clause anyway. It was for situations exactly like this. Sarah took the 3 months and didn't plan anything. She didn't travel. She didn't go on a spiritual journey. She didn't even really relax in any meaningful way. Instead, she sat in her house in her backyard and thought about what had happened. She thought about destruction and rebuilding. She thought about victory and emptiness. She thought about being right and being alone. She thought about the girl, Emily, saying thank you for not ruining everything. By the end of the first month, Sarah had an idea. It started small. She was reading an article about community pools, about how they'd been cut from municipal budgets, how inner-city neighborhoods didn't have access to swimming facilities, how kids were growing up without learning to swim because they didn't have the resources. By the end of the second month, she'd done research, real research, the kind she was good at. By the end of the third month, she had a project. She called Dale at Henderson and Associates, but not about her own pool. She asked him to help her design community facilities, actual public pools, not mud pits or destroyed backyard amenities, but real pools accessible to actual communities. "That's an expensive project," Dale said, not unkindly. "I know." "What changed?" he asked. "I realized I was upset about the wrong thing," Sarah said. "I was protecting an asset instead of recognizing that other people had genuine needs. I'm going to fix that." She met with the director of the Parks and Recreation Department for the county. She proposed a partnership. She had capital. She had legal expertise. What the county had was land and administrative framework. Together, they could build something. The first pool opened in November. It was in Henderson Heights, an economically depressed area on the north side of the county where the municipal pool had been closed for budget reasons 5 years earlier. It was public. It was free. And on the opening day, watching kids swim, kids who'd never had access to a pool before, kids who were learning to swim for the first time, kids who were just ecstatically happy to have a place to be during the summer heat, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not victory, not rightness, just purpose. By the time she was ready to return to work, she had plans for 3 more pools. She'd spent $90,000 rebuilding her own pool and $300,000 building the first community facility. The partnership money was going to something that actually mattered. Richard Kwan was cautiously optimistic when she returned. She came back to work part-time, taking on fewer cases, focusing on pro bono work for nonprofits. The hours were shorter. The money was less, but the work felt less hollow. Meadowbrook Estates didn't change much. Brad Harrison was still insufferable. The HOA still made noise about community standards, but something had shifted. The neighborhood had learned to live with Sarah Chen, and Sarah Chen had learned to live with herself. She saw David Cho one morning walking his dog. They stopped to talk, and he mentioned that his family was planning to visit the new community pool that had opened. "It's supposed to be amazing," David said. "Free, well-maintained, good programs for kids." "I'm glad you'll get to see it," Sarah said. She didn't tell him that she'd paid for it. She'd signed the donation anonymously, asking only that the plaque at the entrance note that the funding had come from a community member who believed pools should belong to everyone. The mud pit was gone now, refilled and rebuilt. The pool looked new, was new, and it functioned exactly as it had before. Sometimes neighbors still asked if they could use it. Sarah said yes more often than she said no. The water got used, it got worn in. And one summer afternoon, sitting on a deck that had seen destruction and rebuilding, Sarah watched 3 teenagers and 2 middle school kids splashing in her pool while she read a book and drank expensive iced coffee, and she felt something close to okay. Not healed, not redeemed, just at peace with the person she'd become. The real victory wasn't turning the pool into mud or turning the mud back into a pool. The real victory was understanding that both of those choices had been mistakes. What mattered was this: a woman who'd been wrong, who'd realized it, and who'd spent her resources fixing it. Not the violation that had started it. Not the rage. Not even the mud. By the following summer, Sarah had become something like a fixture in the community development world. Journalists called her the pool lawyer. Local nonprofits asked for her advice. The county had approved funding for 2 additional pools based on her proposal. She was building something that actually lasted. But the most unexpected consequence came in the form of a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday in June, and the envelope was thick, official, business quality. Sarah almost didn't open it. She got a lot of mail, most of it irrelevant, but something about the handwriting made her pause. It was from Brad Harrison. The letter was long, multiple pages, and it was typed rather than handwritten, which somehow made it feel more serious. "Sarah, I've spent the last year trying to understand what happened between us, and honestly, I'm still not entirely sure I have. But I've learned things that have made me reconsider a lot of my assumptions. When you destroyed your pool, I was angry. I was angry on behalf of the neighborhood, but I was also angry on behalf of myself. I saw you as the villain in this story because it was easier than seeing myself as someone who hadn't bothered to get to know a person I'd lived near for 5 years. When my kid wanted to use your pool, when other families wanted to use it, we didn't ask ourselves why you'd set that boundary. We just thought you were unfriendly. But then I watched you rebuild the pool, and then I watched you fund a community pool, and I realized that what I'd actually been angry about wasn't you not sharing your private property. I was angry that you didn't want to be my friend. That's a different thing entirely, and it's not your responsibility. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, not for using the pool, well, yes, for using the pool without permission, but more broadly for treating you as a character in my neighborhood narrative instead of as a person who had her own story and her own boundaries. I was wrong. You were also wrong about some things, probably. But the fact that you're building pools for kids who wouldn't otherwise have access to them tells me you're thinking about this on a different level than I ever did. I don't expect this to change anything. I don't expect us to be friends. But I wanted you to know that at least one person in this neighborhood has learned something from all of this. Brad Harrison. Sarah read the letter 3 times. Then she printed out her response and left it in Brad's mailbox. Brad, thank you for writing this. You're right about most of it, including the part about me being wrong about some things. I think we both were. The thing I'm learning is that being right is usually less important than being understood, and being understood is usually less important than being willing to understand other people. I was violated, that was real. But I also responded with disproportionate anger, which I used to hurt other people. That was also real. Both of those things can be true. I think we're okay now. Not friends necessarily, but okay. That's enough. Sarah. That was in June. By August, Sarah had committed to finding funding for 10 more pools. The state had gotten involved, seeing a model that worked. She'd been approached by another county interested in replicating the program. Her law practice was changing too. She was taking on fewer commercial cases and more nonprofits, more cases that involved housing rights and environmental justice. Her mother called one evening. They'd been somewhat estranged, with Sarah's mother having always thought her daughter was too driven and missing out on life. Sarah had dismissed these concerns for years. Now, 53 days into her transformed life, she wasn't as certain. I saw something on the news, her mother said, about your pools. They're not my pools, Sarah said. They're community pools. Funded by you. Some of them. There was a pause, then her mother said something she'd never said before. I'm proud of you, not because you're winning cases, but because you're doing this. Sarah hadn't cried when she destroyed the pool. She hadn't cried when she'd rebuilt it. But she cried then, sitting in her home office, hearing her mother be proud of her for something that didn't involve winning or rightness or being the best. By the end of the summer, the first 5 community pools had served approximately 8,000 kids. 8,000. The number was almost impossible to comprehend. 8,000 kids who'd never had access to swimming facilities, who'd grown up in neighborhoods without water to cool off in during the brutal summer heat, who now had a place to be. Sarah was working in her home office one August afternoon, looking over designs for the next facility, when she heard splashing from her own pool. She looked out the window and saw Emily, the girl who'd thanked her the year before, swimming laps with methodical precision. Sarah watched her for a moment, then went out to the deck. You've gotten good, Sarah said. Emily surfaced, wiped water from her face. I'm trying out for the swim team at school. I wouldn't have even known how to swim if I hadn't come here. Well, you're a natural, Sarah said. My mom said I could come swim here sometimes if that's okay. I can ask her to call you, or... It's fine, Sarah said. Come whenever you want, just be safe, okay? Don't dive in alone and watch yourself on the deep end. I will, Emily said. Thank you, Sarah. Seriously, this changed things for me. After Emily went back to swimming, Sarah sat on the deck and watched the pool. Her pool, that had been destroyed and rebuilt and used by her and by others, that had been a symbol of violation and rebuilding and, finally, acceptance. The mud pit was a memory now, just a story she sometimes told, the cautionary tale about what happens when you let rage make your decisions. What mattered was that the story had a second half, the part where she learned to redirect that energy toward something that lasted. The dedication plaque was brass, polished to a shine. Sarah stood at the park's entrance on a bright September morning, watching as the mayor prepared to read it aloud. This facility, the mayor began, is dedicated to those who believe that community resources should serve everyone. Funded through a partnership between the county and private donors who believe in access and equity. The plaque didn't have Sarah's name on it. She'd requested anonymity again, though the media had figured it out anyway. Local news had called her a visionary, an advocate, a woman who'd learned something profound about community and property and the difference between justice and revenge. What Sarah had actually learned was simpler. Destruction was easy. Rebuilding was hard. And redemption wasn't about erasing what you'd done wrong. It was about doing something right afterward, consistently, for as long as it took. Meadowbrook Estates had become her home again, but in a different way. She still lived there, still had her pool. Brad Harrison had apologized more formally, and they'd actually become something like friends. David Cho's kids came to her pool sometimes. Jennifer Mitchell had volunteered at the first community facility, helping with swim lessons. Sarah had turned down the partnership. She'd kept her associate title, handled fewer cases, and spent her time on pools and nonprofits. It was less prestigious. It paid less. But when she lay in bed at night, she felt like a person she could recognize. The pool at Henderson Heights had been expanded. It now had a second lap lane and a shallow section for kids learning to swim. 4 more facilities had opened. 2 more were under construction. There were plans for 10 more over the next 5 years. Sarah received letters sometimes, from kids who'd learned to swim, from parents who were grateful, from coaches who appreciated having access to competitive facilities, from other communities asking how to replicate the model. She answered each one thoughtfully, not because it was professionally required, but because these letters represented something real. Change that had been set in motion by a single woman deciding that destruction wasn't the answer. One evening, sitting by her own pool with a glass of wine and a case file, Sarah received a call from Dale. "I wanted to let you know," he said, "that I've been taking on community pool projects full-time, left Henderson and Associates, figured I'd work with you on these instead." "That's wonderful," Sarah said and meant it. "You started something," Dale said. "You probably don't realize it, but you did. It's not about the mud pit anymore or even about the destruction. It's about the fact that one person decided to use their resources differently, decided to build instead of destroy. There are probably 15 companies now that specialize in community pool construction because of your work." After she hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness and thought about the backyard she'd destroyed. She thought about the anger that had driven her. She thought about how close she'd come to letting that anger define her permanently. The mud pit would always be part of her story. The pool she'd destroyed would always be part of her story. But so would the pools she'd built. So would the kids who'd learned to swim. So would the communities transformed by water and access and the decision to do something good after doing something wrong. Sarah raised her glass to her own pool, the one that had been destroyed and rebuilt and used and loved again. "To second chances," she said to the empty air.